Yes, welcome back. This is F a Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik 16, and no, I am not tweaking, but we are still speaking about the classic debut from Warren G, Regulate, the G Funk era. And with no further delay, if you have not already, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. Go visit theraproller.com when you get a chance. You can leave your ratings on this album and all the other albums that we've reviewed on this channel, and we will continue to as we build this global hip-hop community. And we'll jump right into it. This is category 2, where we go over the rap performance on this album. First dimension in category 2 is going to be dimension 1, personality and charisma. Okay, so Warren G occupies a very interesting space in hip hop. He has the reputation of just being kind of low key, under the radar, laid back, cool, calm, collect. Not the definition of coolness and flyness that you aspire to be like. Not an everyday average Joe type, and not the first person you think about when you think about gangsterism, but respected for making gangster rap. Interestingly enough, he's been able to escape the idea of nepotism. Because he's family to Dr. Dre, he could easily be accused of benefiting from that. But there's this idea that he got it, even though he didn't get it out the mud, because as we talked about in video 1, it was a very comfortable slide into the game. But it wasn't for lack of putting in work and grinding. 2 and 3 was always the original push, so to come out as a solo artist seemed as much as a surprise to him as a lot of folk in the camp. And so because of that, it shines through. I think that becomes very obvious from your first 2 tracks listening, is that he is to himself. I don't want to bother anybody. I'm humble enough to make a track about myself getting jacked. Something unheard of in gangster rap at the time. With that kind of cadence, with that kind of sentiment. They took my Rolex, rapping like you're frightful, but you're a thug. The idea of some brothers pulled out, so I said I'm stuck, right? Like, this just, you know what? I'm the victim. That it's a whole hit song about being the victim and being saved by the singing dude on the track. It doesn't get any more laid back than that. The other side of this, because I mentioned in video 1, there's a slight legacy of Warren G being the underdog or not fighting hard enough for himself, like just kind of missing out on a lot of things that he could have been a part of, and not taking advantage of a lot of things that he could have been a part of, or not taking claim to it. To hear him now say how much his hand was involved in the Chronic album, to hear him now say how much he did this for that person and that, and it's like, why are we just hearing this now, Warren? Or again, I referred to that Drink Champs interview where a lot of his answers are like, I don't know, man. Even describing his beefs with Suge Knight, it kind of makes him look like he got the short end of the stick there. It doesn't make him sound like this Superman, I stood up to the monster and, I stood up to the bully. It doesn't make him sound like David versus Goliath. It makes him sound like he just, found a side door for a lot of things. And it waxes and wanes on this album. There's moments where he gets a little bit more aggressive and, more bossed up. And then there's moments where he just sounds like he wants no drama, and he just leave him out of it. Now, on top of that, there's another element, and we'll probably touch more on it as we go through the other dimensions, but there's this element that has kind of plagued him of corniness. And that comes through on some of the decisions he makes on this album with his inflections and words and actual things that he's saying on here. And at a time that was right in the middle of the burgeoning and bubbling East versus West, it was enough fuel for the detractors, for the East Coasters who were hating on West Coast rap at the time, to be like, this what y'all coming with. uh, and he's already coming in from a softer angle from all the other gangster rap, and he's making those choices on the mic. It doesn't help this case. So it's like this equal blend of coolness and corniness, and if not equal, it's like a 60-40 mashup. And that becomes mostly how Warren is identified in hip-hop, and it started from what was done on this album. If you guys pick up on anything else when it comes to personality and charisma, please feel free to leave it in the comments and rank it on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That's going to take us to dimension 2, the question of the believability or suspension of disbelief. This is not an album that's asking you to really suspend your disbelief. Warren G is telling you this is who he is. He's giving you slices of his personal life and his come up, his upbringing, his side of life in LBC. He's telling you what it's like out there. The other rappers on this album are telling you what it's like in their hood. Triple Oak goes as far as saying on his verse, and I kind of love this is one of the only times I recall a rapper taking this much responsibility in their descriptions of their hood. He's like, don't come to Long Beach after dark. I'm not saying, let me not make my city sound like the worst, or let me not say too much to make it sound like my city's the craziest. And I'm like, oh, what an interesting caveat there to add to your description. But yeah, the overall premise is, this is real life. I am Warren G. I'm not coming up with this super out of this world moniker. I'm using my government name and initial. And so it always boils down to this question: how much do you believe Warren G on this album? How much does he make you believe him? Because he's laid back and everything done on this album matches that, it is easy to get into. It's the idea that he's not giving you these crazy fast-paced beats and rapping all mellow. He's mellow and vibey over vibey stuff, and when he needs to get aggressive, he's aggressive over the vibey stuff, and he might turn up the aggressiveness notch on some of that vibe, on some of the sounds that are used. I mentioned I recognize What's Next, Running with No Brakes. They got a little bit more punch to it than the singles on this album, or a track like This Is the Shack. And so his claims are really grounded as well. He's not talking about outlandish flexing, flossing stuff. Even when it comes to women, skits are talking about pimp-esque things, but he himself, when he's talking about women, it's here and there. It's just like, yeah, we're gonna get some girls. It's not, man, I get them all over the world, all of this stuff. The luxury rap is almost non-existent. It's about getting money, but not in any gross detail. The violent talk is not very descriptive. It's like, yeah, I pack heat if you want to step to this, but he's not going out there doing robberies. He's not going out there doing drive-bys. He's just saying, if you bring drama this way, don't get the mellow confused. Don't take the kindness for weakness, my brother. But as I mentioned, being able to make a track like Regulate, and also accepting and depicting that he can be the victim of that as well as the victor, that brings it down to this really, really, I'm me, this is real as it gets kind of feel. So the most stereotypically non-gangster figures on this album are the ones who give you the most gangster lyrics on the album. That includes Mr. Malik, who at the time was a kid rapper, and the 2 vocalists. Nate Dogg provides the 1 curse word on Regulate. So if your ass is a buster, 213 will regulate. Say 16 in a clip and 1 in a hole. For the time, and again, if your ears are already attuned to the California hip hop scene, this may not be shock to your system, but for us outside of California, it's like, damn, these singers singing hard like this, everybody's a gangster in California. It has that effect. It's unlikely, and so it brings up questions of believability to a pedestrian ear when you're thinking so rudimentary, like singers can't say that, kids can't say that. It's like, nah, anybody could be tough if that's truly who they are. So it raised questions of believability there. But I don't think Warren himself does anything on this album that creates a head scratch of nah or doubt. But something for you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3, the delivery and use of voice. All right, so this is picking up more of that conversation of what Warren did on this mic to even bring the idea of corniness, and that's where you get in moments of things that he did, like on What's Next, where he goes choo choo. And so that's going to come through in moments of Warren's reliance on doing what was, again, popular from his circle. Almost every rapper coming out of that Death Row and Death Row adjacent camp at the time was doing that thing where they just randomly broke into like a flimsy voice, sing-songy cadence. I'm gonna do it, like. And Warren G's take on it was a little higher pitch and a little bit more like out of nowhere. He's like, it's that nigga, and it wasn't melodious. It was just him like becoming animated out of nowhere. And he does that a few times, and it's not following any particular rhythm or melody. And so it doesn't come off as being as well executed as when others did it, who were more rhythmically inclined with their delivery style. Another part of that is when he goes into his non-word spillage of these non-sequiturs in that same cadence, but it's stuff like dum diddy dum or wow dow piggy pow and tick-tocking, which I already mentioned, and that doesn't help it, right? On top of the fact that he does these animated sound effect styles that he like dips in and out of. He goes, hey, and who, and a lot of that stuff that just didn't seem to fit the last thing he said. If he's like cursing you out and saying, yeah, we do this, and then out of nowhere, he's going choo choo, to be offbeat, have no timing with how you're doing this, because there's not a lot of thought to the setup because you chose to freestyle. And I mentioned this in video 1 in category 1, that he's obviously, to a trained ear, freestyling on a third of the songs on this album. That is going to affect how that stuff comes off. You didn't take the time to rein it in and control it. So your style and how you're playing with your voice makes it sound a little flimsy. What you're actually saying makes it sound flimsy. And so those are the choices. Outside of that, when Warren actually puts pen to paper or has assistants, if you are to believe that, a couple people help writing, there's some credit that was given to Corrupt and Snoop. And when things are fleshed out, like in so many ways, how he ends each verse with the same refrain, and he stays in that mellow, easy to listen to register, and everything kind of flows. He's flourishing. Same to say on all the other singles, right? Regulate is where you get a little bit of the playfulness, and even that seems more controlled. If he could have done that more throughout the album, then it would have been just seen as his style and him mastering it. Because on Regulate, he's putting the inflection where he wants you to feel the tenseness and the tension of the scene. He wants you to feel the emotion. As you listen to that song, you're putting yourself in the picture, or you are picturing somebody being like, look, I don't want no trouble. Just take what you got. What else you gonna do? I mentioned that line where he's like, I'm stuck. It's a giving up. And then by the time you get to the final verse, you get the idea that he is purposely contemplative and now relaxed, right? I'm into a whole new era. G-Funk, step to this, I dare ya. But see, it's things like that. It's choices like that, inflection. Joke if you want about the properness of the California accent. Even the hardest of the hard are not walking around saying, I dare ya. So it's this idea of those things that add to the corniness basket, where the other things that he did on that track add to the, he's a genius. He's a creative genius. And so those are delivery choices that forever stamp this album, for better or for worse. He can't be blamed for not switching it up and giving you variety. He's not rapping the same way on every one of these 10 tracks. So credit is due there, but all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to Dimension 4, the flow. All right, the same way Warren does not use the same delivery on every track, he switches up the flows. It may not be the most noticeable switches because they're not these extreme variations. It's just there's a more measured approach, and then there's a more experimental approach. As the beats change in tempo, he matches the tempo, so he raps a little faster on And You Don't Stop and What's Next than he does on Do You See or This DJ, and that has a different effect. It gives you different modalities of Warren. He's able to really slow it down and be basic on Do You See. He even kind of harmonizes on the hook. That's about it. You're not going beyond basic A-B structures. The guests are more in pocket with their flow. Both of the twins have way more control of their rap style on every song that they appear on. And Dove Shack, they're rapping circles around here. One of the members sounds like Corrupt, and the other sounds a little like LV. And so Bo Rock of Dove Shack has so much mastery over his ability to weave around with his singing, just like Nate Dogg. He's fitting more syllables than Warren G on that track. Yeah, Warren is not going to give you syllables. He's not going to stack. There's not any internal rhymes. It's clever use of spacing. When I think of what he did on this DJ, he's like May, Faye, because I don't like to dream about getting paid, where he incorporates that Rakim line. It's like, yes, I'm following the bass line. I'm just going with this groove. And that's the extent of flowing. There's so much offbeat rapping on this album, on that third where he chooses to freestyle, that you really appreciate the songs where he's on, because that simple flow is welcome. I don't know how many more patterns he would have given you, because throughout his career, I don't think Warren G has deviated and flexed a lot more than what he gave here. So all those things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to Dimension 5, the wordplay and bar intent. Oh boy. It could be argued that Warren's talking parts on the beginning and ends of songs have a little bit more wit to them than some of the verses. In the beginning of So Many Ways, where he was like, I was in Baghdad before they was in their dad's bag. I'm like, why could you put that into your verses? Like, it's still not the hottest thing, but it shows that he has some wit to him. You know, when he's coming, he's doing his space cateers and space cadets. It's also showing more personality than in some of the verses, but there's no real sign of wordplay here. There's moments of slick talk here where he says, Young Mac Daddy do his thing cause I pack right. I got 44 ways to make you act right. That's the extent. That is the extent of cleverness that you're gonna get from Warren G on this album. You know, I mentioned how he's painting the picture on this DJ where he's like, street lights on, so my mama says, come back home. He says, I hit the gate, then I hops on my Schwinn. Then I tell the homies, all right, then, right? Saying a lot by saying a little. He's good at that. There's this point in Do You See It where he breaks things down creatively, and I thought it was interesting because he said, should I A, go back to slinging dope, or should I B, maintain and try to cope, or should I C, just get crazy and go wild? But no, I chose D, create the G child. I'm like, okay, a whole multiple choice breakdown in a verse. Again, that's simplistic cleverness. That is the extent of what you're getting when it comes to wordplay and bar intent on this album. You're going to get way more of that from the guests on here, but they don't necessarily save the album in that department. They're just a couple steps beyond what Warren does here. So all those things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to Dimension 6, the overall quotability, punchlines, or poetic wisdom. I find that Warren G, if we have to choose between either of these two, it's gonna be he leans more to poetic wisdom. And it's not really that he's dropping gems, it's that he just says some really easily digestible stuff. The punchlines are probably gonna come more from rappers like Josh Skills. She is the definition of what I pointed out in category 1, with a lot of the references being cemented in time. These are definitely 70s babies. She ends her whole song by saying "Nanu Nanu" like Morgan Mindy, and it's like, what? It wasn't this dope line to end on, but she has attempts in there to do punchlines throughout. She says, "Smooth like chocolate, so call me Big Mama Kane. Mr. It's the Master Aces of the Spade. Rapping skills are thinner than niggas on AIDS." Like, ugh. There's a time where AIDS was like the biggest statement you could make, the biggest controversial punchline. "I rhyme and swim waves of soul like Billy Ocean." Yeah. "Break your achy like Billy Ray." Like, she's doing it. A lot of similes to get her punchlines across, but that's as close to a punchline as we get. When Warren attempts to say stuff, it's really like, why? So he comes in on his verse on What Next and says something and just starts off by saying, "No, it's not Pete Rock or Dr. Dre." I'm like, why were their names needed to be mentioned? And then later on, he makes the mistake that's kind of gone down in history of, in the midst of his freestyling it, and once again, when he's saying "what's next" and he tries to spell it, he says NXET. Yeah, so he's been quoted in some of the worst ways on this album. That's about it. When you're talking about punchlines and poetic wisdom, there's no like words to live by or any poignant and profound statements made here. Chords, strings, we brings, melody, G-funk, where rhythm is life and life is rhythm. He was talking, he wasn't even rapping, but it's quotable. It's going down in history. So love to see y'all comments on this dimension on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 7, the concepts. The most conceptual stuff you're getting on this album are the skits. They're all done in this vein of pimp talk. But again, if we're talking about the songs, it's going to be Regulate. Regulate itself is this idea of, it was a nice night, I felt like gambling, and my homie had to get me out of jam that I found myself in, and told from the vantage point of the two people involved getting out of it. That is your conceptual material there. It is not a concept album. Again, that being the biggest song off the album, that being such a mega huge monster rap song, that for a lot of you may be all the conceptual material you need. Most classic albums only need one, and it can be stated that this fills that quota. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to the content dimensions. Let's start with dimension 8, externalized content. How much is Warren G talking about outside of his inner monologue, his exposition? Not a lot of social commentary. There's statements about the hood part of Long Beach City and the risk and the dangers of that life and not going on the wrong side of it. That is really it. Everything is told from let me give you a little bit of Warren G. So there's way more focus on dimension 9, the internalized content. Regulate is less of a statement on the dangers of a dice game. It's not coming from that angle. It's just coming from, damn, anything could happen, but don't mess with us, because even if you get me, my homie's in the cut. So yeah, it's not really, that wasn't the goal and point of that song. That song is just painting the picture. And do you see, and this DJ are giving you slices of Warren's upbringing. He's telling you where he went to school. He's telling you who he rode with, what he spent his time doing. And the other aspect, he's telling you about how hungry he was to get in the game, how Snoop got locked up and that was a setback for them, but they kept trying and now it paid off. But he leaves it on a cliffhanger because he's saying, you know, do I do this? Do I do that? And he's like, you know what? It ends on an aggressive note. He's like, don't try me while I'm trying to come up, because this can happen to you. And in the midst of both of those songs, he's revealing that he used to gangbang. He flat out says it on this DJ, and I used to gangbang, right? And on Do You See, he mentions going back to that as a moment of contemplation when things were looking bleak for 213. And that's about it. That's all you really get besides braggadocio here from all the rappers. It can be weighted because those were singles. Those are the songs that people mostly know this album by. But if you decide not to add weight to it, then it really comes down to 2 songs and a half of that kind of content. Something to consider for both Dimension 8 and Dimension 9 on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the final dimension, Dimension 10, the storytelling. All right, we just talked about it. An important feature and aspect of the song Regulate is the idea that this is all enveloped on a mission to get booty. They slid by some women whose car was broke down. Nate Dogg says, "Ooh, I like your size." They go into the East Side Motel, and that was the mission from the beginning. It's just that Warren kind of messed up the plans by stopping to play this dice game. So it's still this idea of we live that Mac life. Now, Nate got the freaks, and that's a known fact. Before I got jacked, I was on that same track. So yeah, it's that idea that this is just a mishap. This is an unfortunate disturbance to the agenda, but it didn't stop the agenda. The agenda still continued. And now let me tell you about this G-Funk thing. Right? We handled that. We just dropped some bodies on the midst of going to the motel. Just another day in the life. With such a creative angle. It's all about the angles on this song. It's not so much the story itself. The story isn't this like mind-blowing tale. It's the fact that you have the rapper and the singer going back and forth. The rapper is saved by the singer, who comes out blasting, remorseless, and I'll do it again type style. And then is warning you at the end, you know. Is warning you at the end. Like, don't let it happen. And that's that. It goes down as one of the greatest storytelling songs in hip-hop history. And for that fact alone, that's probably all the story you need on a 10-song album that plays as 12 tracks. But it's up to you to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. And with that, we conclude this Category 2 breakdown and review of the classic album Regulate, the G-Funk era, by none other than the G-Child himself, Warren G. Just turned 30 years old this month. And yeah, go check that out. Go back, dust it off, listen to it, revisit it if you're familiar with it. Listen to it for the first time if it's new to you. Leave your rankings on theraproulette.com. Leave your comments here and join us for the next album. Until then, y'all know what it is. F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to master.